Alright class, so for this second video, I'll be covering on the registered land under LRA 1925, whereby an adverse possessor can make a claim to become a valid or successful adverse possessor if the land is registered. So the law is different as compared to making a claim under Limitation Act 1980, because Limitation Act only concerns unregistered land. If the land is registered, so LRA 1925 will come into place. So there is a correction to be made on the slide, because the slide mentioned LPA 1925, but it's actually LRA 1925. So as you already know, if you occupy a place which is unregistered, so the law, the statutory provisions that will be applicable is Section 15 and also Section 17 of the Limitation Act. So it says that if you occupy the place for 12 years, the original title will be extinguished. Whereas, under Land Registration Act 1925, if you occupy the place for 12 years, the title of original owner will not be extinguished. So what will happen is that the adverse possessor can make a claim that he has an overriding interest over that piece of property. So this is stipulated under Section 70 sub 1 sub F. So the effect of overriding interest would be that his interest, the adverse possessor's interest, will be binding on the purchaser. So it means that the purchaser needs to acknowledge that the land he's purchasing is being occupied by other people, and these people can make a successful claim to become an adverse possessor. So when you have an overriding interest, what will happen is that it will trigger Section 75 sub 1 Land Registration Act. Section 75 sub 1 says that if a person already occupies a place for a period of 12 years and that place concerns registered land, so the original owner will hold the property on trust for the squatter. So in the sense that he cannot sell the property to a new purchaser, because his interest will be binding on the new purchaser up until the point where he registered it. So once he has registered his title to become a valid adverse possessor, it will totally extinguish the rights or the title of the original owner. So the registration of an adverse possessor, you can have a look at the Section 75 sub 2. So if you have sufficient evidence, sufficient witnesses, you can make a declaration under oath that you have truly occupied a place for 12 years. Then you can go to the land registrar office and make a claim, and if the registrar is satisfied with your claim, you'll be awarded with possessory title. So we've already covered a few types of title in semester 3. You can either be awarded with absolute title, possessory title, or other titles. So for in this case, since he is making a claim as adverse possessor, he will be conferred with possessory title in the sense that his title is not absolute, he's not truly the original owner of that property, but because of the fact that he has already occupied a place for 12 years, he will automatically replace the original owner. So few examples is in the case of Central London Commercial Estates and Kato Kabuki, and also Spectrum Investment and Homes. So we look into the first one. So in this case, what happened was you have landlord and tenant. So landlord agreed to lease out the property to tenant. But the issue is because the tenant never occupied a particular place, so the adverse possessor came into the property and occupied it for a period of 12 years. So now the issue arises whether the adverse possessor can make a successful claim as an adverse possessor. But in this case, court held that because he has already satisfied 12 years, it was the tenant and not the landlord who holds the property on trust for the adverse possessor. So it means that the tenant will hold the property on trust for the squatter, and the squatter will become the lessor. Will become the lessee, the tenant of the property. So it means that he will not displace the landlord, but he will only displace the tenant. So this case needs to be distinguished from the other case, whereby the other case is that if you already displace the tenant, the landlord can actually evict you because you're only displacing the tenant. Same goes into this principle, is the adverse possessor occupied the place for 12 years, but it was the tenant who holds the property on trust for the adverse possessor, not the landlord. So another case to be considered is the case of Spectrum Investment and Homes. So what happens in this case was that again you have landlord and tenant who made an agreement to lease the piece of property for 99 years. So now the tenant assigned the property to Mrs. Holmes, oral weekly tenancy, and at the same time the tenant also leased out the house to Mrs. David. So now what happened is that the landlord subsequently sold the property to Spectrum Investment, and Mrs. David wants to make a claim that she has the lease better as compared to Mrs. Holmes. So Mrs. Holmes occupied the place up until the day that she dies. So then it was continued by her daughter. So there was a continuity despite that she occupied the place and then subsequently her daughter continued occupying the place, and they satisfied the period of 12 years. So the good thing about the daughter occupying or continuing to occupy the place is that once she has established that she has been occupying the place for 12 years, she went to the land registrar office and registered it. So Mrs. David now wants to prevent Mrs. Holmes' daughters from becoming this valid adverse possessor. So what she did was she surrendered the lease so that the Spectrum Investment can evict Holmes' daughter from the property. But in this case, she failed because the daughter has already registered her rights. So as such, she's become the successful adverse possessor concerning this type of property. So now the moral of the story is that if already occupied a place for 12 years under registered land, you will not automatically extinguish the title of the original owner. So it's very important for you to go to the land registrar office and quickly register it in order to defeat the claim by the original owner in the future. So I'll stop my video for this part and I'll cover the new law under the Land Registration Act 2002.